So good evening. This is the July 11th, 2024 Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee meeting. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Everyone should be connected to the webinar. You don't have to call in. You're automatically muted. The presentation will be recorded and posted to the Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling webpage. The agenda does hold time for public comment. Comments will be permitted in the time allotted per committee rules and at the discretion of the chair. If you're having trouble with any aspect of the broadcast, technical assistance is available at the website that is shown on this slide. Only the committee chair may recognize a public attendee. You may use the raise hand feature to indicate your desire to participate when the chair acknowledges the time has arrived on the agenda. Those calling in will also be recognized and given the opportunity to speak. There is also designated time on each agenda to allow members of the audience an opportunity to speak to the committee. Once a public attendee is recognized by the chair, the response will relate only to the request made by the committee and may be subject to a time limit. And finally, new business that arises or is suggested during the public comment period should be placed on the next meeting agenda. The Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee meeting is being supported with Spanish translation services. Panelists and attendees need to actively select between the Spanish or English room. There is an option to toggle between the two during the meeting. And meeting best practices is please speak clearly and in a normal tone. One person should speak at a time, and the raise hand feature is available to ask for clarification as needed. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Ashwin to go ahead and start the meeting.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. Hope everybody survived the weather that we've been having. Yeah, we have a couple items today. The extra fees discussion is something, we had it as a committee about a year ago, actually. And so we can recap that and have that discussion. But that was something me and Sandra had talked about recently. Just wanted to bring it into for a group discussion. But I guess, Kathy, can we do roll call introductions?
Yes, I'll go ahead and call the roll, and then if you would like introductions on beyond that, just let the committee know. So, Chair Ashwin Naharaja.
Yep, here.
Vice Chair Sandra.
Here.
Leslie.
Here.
Hannah. Okay. Christy.
Present.
Erin is absent tonight. Myra.
Thank you, Steve.
Peeves.
Present.
Vinod.
Sorry, my space bar wasn't unmuting me. I'm here.
And Brian.
Present.
Thanks. Yeah, so we can go through the agenda. So like I was saying, the extra fees, it was a discussion we had about a year ago. I don't know if people remember that, or I was going to recap it briefly. I personally had an experience where I had been charged an extra fee for a Happy Can lid, and so we had, it was something that was interesting to me, that how it was set up, where beyond what we set in rates, the haulers can charge you for certain additional services. One of them is if your lid is open, assuming that you have like more garbage in there, that can be a fee, which is about $2 to $3. And then there's also an extra garbage bag fee. Those were the two main ones that I was interested in. And there are some additional ones that are on the rate site, like when they walk up service to your house, or a callback service. And so we had, Waste Management come in, Garbarino and Pride, kind of to give us a sense of how are the different haulers going about it, what are their systems, and protocols, just so that we can understand the consistency that is being applied over the whole like region. I think one of the things from our charter in this committee, right, is we want to make sure that the service is consistent across different service providers to provide that consistency. So I think it was an interesting discussion. From my perspective, the main differences was Waste Management. They have a big portion of the region, but they have their automated system where they have cameras on their trucks that take a picture of your garbage can, and then it automatically uses AI to actually just send you a charge in your bill. Pride has cameras on their truck, but it wasn't automated. It still required the truck driver to go out and place a tag on the can. It was like an oops tag. And then one additional thing I learned while I was on the ride along with Pride is that every single one of their trash cans actually has those rules like printed on the trash can. So that as you set out your trash can to the curb, it's kind of like that reminder that, hey, this is the rules. And then the third one was Garbarino, which they did not have video evidence. I think they said sometimes people would like snap a picture of the situation, but they would have the driver actually just like manually record it. So there was definitely some variation amongst haulers and how they do it. And maybe some differences in opinion from committee to haulers and kind of like the purpose, and the scope of those fees. So I think it was good learning, but I didn't have like I don't like the idea of people being charged extra fees and it being inconsistent, but I didn't really have like a specific action in my head at that time, how things would go forward. The one thing I have noticed, and the concern we brought up with Dean when he was here was, at least my concern was that I wasn't notified of the infraction until my bill came, 2 months later, right? And then, and that was an issue. And one thing I have noticed is that I recently got an extra fee charged, and it was within a day or 2 days of when it happened. So it was pretty immediate, which I thought was pretty interesting. There was like an automated email response. I actually sent it to Kathy and Tom at the time, just as because we were meeting, I was like just showing them like it was nice to see that had changed based on some of the feedback we had given that, hey, at least people are aware that they're being charged. Pride is putting these big stickers on there that you can't miss when you go to something like, hey, I made a mistake, here's the thing. And so it was nice to see that Waste Management had actually made that change. It was my neighbor's can though, so I didn't have to pay it. I was able to dispute it. So I still follow the rules because I think it's important. So I thought that was interesting. And then also just, I don't know, the ride along I thought was, just anecdotally when I was watching, it was nice to see the drivers didn't have to look at the trash cans, but just my own perception was that when I was on the route with Waste Management, it seemed like there was a lot more open cans than when I went on the Pride disposal. And I'm not sure if that was like neighborhood, if it was just the time of the week, but that was just something I noticed that I thought was interesting. Is it seemed like it was more pervasive in the Waste Management location, which is actually my neighborhood, compared to Pride disposal, which was closer to Tigard. And then the other thing I'll add is I've talked to a lot of my neighbors about it because I've seen that their cans are open, and I like, hey, have you been charged a fee? Can you look at it and send it to me? And I haven't gotten much feedback from them on it. So I'm having a hard time gauging how big of a concern it is amongst folks because, again, this is all anecdotal. I haven't gotten much feedback beyond my own concerns about it. So I was just curious, bringing it back, people have had time to think about it. If you've done a ride along, maybe your perceptions have changed. And then Sandra, I know you also have some thoughts, so I'd like to hear those and see if there's something that we want to push forward on it. Yep, Kathy. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Aaron provided me with some information about what happened over the last year in regards to rates around this and discussions that occurred. I'm more than happy to wait until the committee wants to have their discussion, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to pass that information along.
Yeah, we'll capture that a little bit later, Kathy. Thank you for bringing that up. Sandra, would you mind sharing your thoughts? Because you had reached out, and so I'd like to hear your difference of opinion.
Yes, I was getting a lot of feedback from different friends and coworkers. I even had a coworker say she was charged extra for her yard debris bin not being fully closed. And so I went to our rate sheet and I didn't see anything uh, uh really. I mean, it seemed like the majority of the people complaining were of one particular hauler. I don't know if you want me to say it or not. I have a different hauler in my neighborhood, and our neighbors constantly have like maybe 2 inches or so open, and they say they had never been charged. The others, they said, hey, my garbage lid was like 1 inch open and they charged me. And then there was the issue of charging an overcapacity charge versus an extra bag fee. Some have been charged an extra bag fee for having a little bit open, which I think is completely unfair. That's like a $5 difference. I'm looking on here on the screen at the fee itself. Our overcapacity charge description says what it's about, but it doesn't say, is it 1 inch open, 5 inches? There's no really any guideline there. So I feel that some haulers are taking advantage of this and charging what they like, and people are just paying it because they have no choice, but maybe they don't know that there's a difference between an extra bag versus a overcapacity charge. And the yard debris thing, I didn't even know we could even do that. I don't see anything about that.
I don't believe yard debris is subject to I think it should only be trash that is subject to a happy canner fee.
So I asked her to give me something to prove that. She hasn't yet, but so I think we should put some kind of guidelines in there on what constitutes an overcapacity charge if the garbage bag is in the garbage can. I mean, there's been pictures where it's significantly open, and that's fair, but when it's just a couple inches, I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. No, I thought about, the concept of, do we really even need a happy can fee, right? Is it really just if there's an extra bag or nothing? But then you might just have them round up every time the can is open to an extra bag fee. And then from a cost perspective, right, an extra bag next to the trash can seems to be very different than a popped lid extra can where it, they don't have to get out of the truck to dump it out versus they have to get out of the truck to dump it out. So, I would agree. Maybe there's some like more rule shaping that, defines. Are you thinking like that kind of situation where we say, hey, unless the bag is next to the can, or are you thinking like if a happy can it has to be like greater than 6 inches, it becomes an extra bag fee type of thing? Because that also seems kind of difficult to, unless we start putting rulers on things and.
I mean, I've seen pictures where it's significantly open. I go, yeah, okay, I'll accept that. And I've seen others where, and I actually, someone sent me a video where it was dumping it out, and there were 2 bags that came out. When I look at the our rate sheet and they say, hey, this particular garbage can holds 2 kitchen bags, I go, well, that was 2 bags that came out. I don't know the exact size of those. They may have been super large kitchen bags, and they happen to be a little over I couldn't tell from the video that the lid was open. It just started the video when it was pulling it up and dumping it.
Yeah.
But they got charged an extra bag fee for that. And I was like, well, that's not right.
Yeah, I guess my question is, what do you think the threshold should be between a happy can and an extra bag? Like what?
I don't know if they're going to charge an extra bag. It has to be pretty significant. I would think 6 inches or more, maybe, or some very visible amount of garbage there, not just happens to be there because they didn't squish it down. And it can be an optional thing. I mean, there's the company that services our neighborhood apparently doesn't charge if it's a couple inches open, while others are very sticklers, it seems. And they're like, hey, look at that. It's not quite closed. I'm going to get them.
Yeah, I think that's a bit difficult to enforce, but I think I agree with you that the rules could be better defined to make sure that they're operating within those guidelines more clearly. I think how they enforce it is probably up to them, because I feel like even my ride along, it was driver to driver dependent, right? If it's not an automated system. So
Well, the one in particular did have videos. So if that helps any on the one that gets marked.
Yeah, I know you. Yeah, that should be more straightforward on those. Cool. Thanks, Sandra for bringing that up. Or Brian, did you want to?
Yeah, no, I love that this topic came up. So, when I knew it was on the agenda, the first thing I did was, I wanted to go back to my own billing, right? And I have waste management, so I went through. I've got dinged one time for the $7 extra bag fee. Never done an extra bag, and I remember the incident. What it was is we had I can't remember, something with a long handle, right? We couldn't break it, so it was sticking out. Dinged us fully for an extra bag type of thing. And I wanted to see the video because I know Waste Management has it. Not available anymore because it's purged out. It was too old because this is like over a year now. And so for me, I think that there is no clear definition between the two. The way I have always interpreted it has, just standard resident is if the lid's open, you get the $2. If you literally have an extra bag, then the bag is the, sitting next to the can is the $7. I agree. I think the language here is not very clear. I think we have to clear it up. I don't think we can get into the 2 inches, 6 inches type of thing. I think it is, at least for me, directly, that's my one viewpoint. I did ask some of my neighbors and people in the community that I know here. Everybody has auto pay. Nobody notices. They don't even know if they're getting extra fees or smiley cans or anything, to be honest. So I think it goes very much under the radar. So I'm very curious, once Kathy shares the numbers, has there been an increase? Has there been more fees of late? Just curious, holler to holler and things like that. Because I think that's something we should definitely keep an eye on as a committee. Because if we see an uptick in these fees, is it just because they're, an increase naturally, or is it more discretionary? So I think it's something that we need to understand first and foremost. Like I said, the definition between extra bag and overcapacity. I think that's the first and foremost. So.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Good comments. Pete, you want to add something? You're on mute still, Pete.
Still not used to this whole Zoom environment after 4 years. So I agree that we need to have some kind of clear standards, and we need to have some kind of clear guidelines for interpretation by the various haulers so that everybody is treated equitably with this. I don't think that if a lid is peeking up an inch or two because you've got extra air in a bag, or you've got an extra long handle you couldn't bust down, or we're in a hurry and it was raining out and you didn't squish the bag in there, or any number of things. A cat got in there and turned things around. I don't think that that merits the charge. I think that the point made earlier is correct, that there's a very de minimis increase in cost for a couple of inches, even 6 inches of a lid sticking up, because there's no extra labor and there's virtually no extra disposal cost at the landfill. So it seems petty to me, and therefore I think we need to have some kind of clarity so that there's something that's enforceable if a customer is being taken advantage of in some way, or perceives that they're being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Pete. Vinod?
Yeah, I was just gonna, well, I agree with where Pete was starting. I think with all you guys, there should be some clarity. I think when the haulers were, if I remember when they were there, that they do give the driver some discretion. Like, is it really open? But you also don't want to create an environment where lids are open all the time, where you're going to attract factors, or things are going to blow out. For us, for example, during COVID, we had to go to a larger can because we were consuming more at home and we were never getting close. I'm not admitting to anything because I never got fined, but it's, I think there is some driver discretion, and maybe some companies are like, hey, if it's an inch, it's open. But I think there's a need to keep some enforcement, but maybe clarity would be the way to go. And I'm curious what Kathy's going to get from their point of view.
but not, I mean, we don't add, apply the same rule to like recycling, and sometimes I feel like recycling gets blown out and things like that. I mean, do you think it's like specific to trash for that reason? Or
I don't know if it, to be honest, I'm not a hauler, so I don't know if it applies to recycling, but I would think it follows the same thing. You don't want recycling open and blowing out of the can,
yeah.
Littering the streets and things like that. So there has to be some kind of, hey, these are the rules.
Hmm.
Fines, DEQ fines, the police fines, if you're breaking rules, people, there's some sort of enforcement. But yeah, I think I agree with that. It'd be nice to know, what is it? And I think a lot of times people get warnings. Sounds like you guys aren't, though. You're getting dinged on the first one, but I don't know the each scenario, but
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't think I ever received a warning on mine, but it kind of just popped up.
yeah, I mean that might be nice to, like, hey, this is your can was open this day. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Maybe that'd be more fair for people that are against being fined.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think I don't want to like vilify the haulers or the the customers. I think it's just good to have that clarity for both, so that it's applied consistently. I think like Pete said, the perception of being treated and equal. Did you have another comment, Pete?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I agree with nobody wants litter blowing around their neighborhood, whether it's petrusable waste or trash or recyclables. On the other hand, we have weather conditions like wind that open up lids, whether they're cracked open or fully shut. And unless the hauler wants us to put a latch on it and cause them all kinds of pain to try to empty the container, I think it's something that's reasonable to expect that there's going to be some variations and that there should be some accommodation for, even when we establish some standards, as I made the case for oops, 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing, so that people understand that this is an issue that they need to deal with, watch for it, and they'll be, in most cases, more attentive when there's an issue. But if you're just suddenly surprised by something, or I think it was Brian made the point that a lot of customers are auto pay, it's just taking advantage of customers. And I don't think that we want to have a system where people feel like once they do discover it, that this is something that they're being taken advantage on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think automation is good, but I'm also always worried that, at some point it's just going and, from computer to computer, and there's no person in there to intervene.
Well, and that's the other issue with the increase of AI, right? So Waste has automated feedback based on what the camera said with the AI algorithm for the amount of opening or the amount of excess. There's a lot of room for problem there. So I think we really need to look at that whole, how's it gauged? What is it? And can we provide some kind of sense of reprieve or grace or amnesty for folks so that they can get with it and everybody's, again, having the same expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the recycling world, they talk a lot about Recycle Partnership talks about how they were using food tags to correct people contaminating through recycling. So they were going through and saying, hey, you made a mistake. So maybe if that's what people are looking for. I think on the coast, they do use some sort of latch system because the winds are so much higher.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and adding to weather, I've had raccoons I've seen on camera open my trash can at night. I've caught it the morning before, but can be more, a lot of factors that can come in there. Christy, want to add something?
Yeah, I really like the idea of warnings, and it seems to me that would even benefit the company because it would be more likely to lead to people actually complying with a sense that they don't hate the company. Oh, okay, I was warned, I get it. I will do that. I'm not just being nailed arbitrarily. So I like the idea of warnings. I also think the fees should be somewhat commensurate with the cost. And if the cost really is completely negligible, it's harder to justify the fee.
Mm-hmm.
I see that. I suppose you're filling up their trucks faster, or there's, more waste hauled, but 2 inches open, it just doesn't seem like that's really imposing much of a cost, unless there's something I'm not thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, we may not know that, but I agree. It should be commensurate with what it's impacting. So we should understand that. Thanks, Christy. Brian, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I was just going to tag in with because Christy kind of read my mind. I think the warning, it's about changing behavior, right? And I think we really have to hit on that one as well. Description is definitely there. I completely agree. But the warning system, creating and mandating that the haulers do something like that, because ultimately we all want our streets to be clean and free of stuff blowing around and all of that bit. And we could even do something where you get, you get a couple warnings, you get dinged, and then if you get like three, you first ding's $2, next one's $7, next one is $20. I don't know. That'll change behavior if you keep increasing the amount of the penalty. Not saying that that's feasible, but just as an illusionary, as an analogy here, I think that's the two big pieces to really, ensure the behavior has changed.
Yeah. Maybe just add that it's not always, we shouldn't always consider it a penalty if it's like an extra bag, because I know I have extra stuff I had to do after July 4th because I'm normally a smaller household and my household grew for a week. So, but yeah, I think it's we want that transparency and we want to make sure that people are getting the message if it's not something that we want and that they understand that properly. And Sandra, after this, Kathy, I'll let you go. And we'll probably need to move on. Sandra, you're on mute.
I know, I was trying to figure out how to get it off. Brian, were you charged $7 for the
Yes.
stick hanging out of your garbage can? See, that's just not fair. I mean, really, that's not an extra bag. It should have been the $2 and something. And this particular company was doing that too. It was like, if it was like 4 or 5 inches open, they charge for a full bag. And that's not right. I think they're taking advantage. And of course the bill comes 2 months later. They're like, oh, what the, and then the video was.
I was going to say I'm on auto pay, so I didn't notice it. I literally did an
Yeah.
audit because of this. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to assume anyone's be taken advantage of, but I think again we should clarify. We should make sure the rules are clear and that we have a mechanism to make sure that both the customers and the haulers understand that and it's clear. But I think, yeah, there's a lot open to interpretation for better or for worse, right? I'm sure if we keep track of the people who are, who aren't being dinged, right? I'm sure I think it's just the inconsistency, right? Is what we should focus on there. Kathy, can you drop some knowledge on this?
Hi there. So just a few things. So after GRAC heard the presentation a year and a half ago, in preparation for this year's rate review, there were many discussions with the haulers, but at that point, they didn't reach a final consistent approach. So the short-term remedy was that if you look at the rate sheet now, that for the rates that go into effect August 1st, it now says that an extra bag bundle of garbage applies to properly bagged or bundled materials outside the cart. It does not apply if there's somehow a bag, some estimate of an extra bag above. It has to be a bag that's sitting outside the cart. So that's one change. And then the overcapacity is still similar to what it was in the past. And just a couple of thoughts. One, we're going to take this up and we're going to have a very large rulemaking as well as in rate review next year. So we are going to revisit it. But also, both of these fees have been around. Whether it was good in the beginning or not, I don't know. But for at least 20 years. And some of it had to do with those customers that were stomping down their garbage and adding a lot more weight to what was in the can. And then that does have, however small it might be, potentially an extra cost of disposal, since disposal is average, it's across the whole aggregate of the system. I agree that the Smiley Can one is the most difficult to assess. And we can work on some language around that, but we're hopeful that with the extra bag having to be outside the can, that will improve, sort of how that piece of it's interpreted. in terms of a notice, there is a cost of doing notice. I mean, you're not collecting the fees and you're also adding, however small again it might be, but in the aggregate, it does add up. But we certainly, staff could keep that in mind when we start engaging in the conversations again after these rates go into effect. But Aaron just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we did listen and heard some of the questions at the time, and we are still working with the Hauler Association to even further clarify. But the one change is that on the rate sheet now, it does say appropriately bagged or bundled materials outside the cart, and it is just on garbage. And I don't know why it only was garbage. That happened before, even though I've worked here in 18 years now. It was before my time, but that's the thought. And I really appreciate hearing from the committee on on the suggestions and sort of what the concerns are. And I made good notes, and I'll re-listen to this again. And when we open up our rulemaking in this next annual phase, as well as with the rate setting, we'll see if we can get even better.
Yeah, no, Kathy, I think that was a really positive change that was done as part of the rates. I think we'll have to see if folks notice that as it goes forward. And you say the rulemaking, you mean as part of RMA, right? We can just revisit this as part of the overall rulemaking that's going to be going through.
We are planning on doing a large rulemaking this time. So a lot of it is RMA, but some of it is just going back and picking up rules that either aren't quite on point or that we're missing on any topic. Is basically it's going to be a general rulemaking that we could pick up anything that either needs to be changed or added.
Yeah, and is that going to be this year, for the end of the year? Yeah, part of the busyness. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it was good to. It's good to hear that there's been follow-up action, and I think a lot of the concerns were considered, and at least I've seen some changes as a customer that I feel like were a part of that. So I think I've seen some improvement myself, but I know there's variability. So Pete, I think we need to move on, but if you want to add some final thoughts, Pete and Vinod, but please let's keep it brief.
I'm gonna lower my hand. Keep it
Yeah.
I'm just curious, in the conversations you're having, is it adding the extra bag or the open lid to recycling? Is that part of the conversation? Maybe it should be.
I don't know, because since I'm not part of rate setting anymore, but I'll pass it on.
Just curious because I didn't know that it didn't apply to that either.
Cool. Well, thanks for the discussion. So next item, correct communicate. My agendas. Program updates from Kathy.
Yes, reading off Erin's notes again. She wanted to pass on that we just completed our second round of interviews for the solid waste and recycling manager position. A decision has not been made, but we are moving forward. So we've had 2 rounds of interviews. Also, the program specialist, the PACU's old position, it closed last weekend, and we're hopeful to get interviews started for that as well, which should help on some of the reporting requirements that she oversaw, and things like that. And then the other thing is that the ORSOP, the System Optimization Survey for the RMA, is due at the end of the month. And DEQ's second rulemaking comment period for the RMA also ends toward the end of this month, and Washington County is intending to provide comments, submit comments to DEQ on the Recycling Modernization Act proposed rules.
Great. Any other updates for the calendar, Kathy?
I could do the quickly do the calendar updates. So we're hopeful to cancel the August meeting. Many of us are on vacation and we don't have any action items. So if that's okay with the committee, we would, our next meeting would be September 12th. And at the September 12th meeting, County Council has confirmed they're going to come to the group and provide a presentation and take questions on just what does it mean to be a volunteer for a board of county commissioners work group. You know, the fact that you all are public officials and therefore you're subject to ethics surrounding public, you know, open communications and public meetings, and there have been changes at the state level. And I just thought it would be really good. I would like to hear that conversation about what are the do's and don'ts around sort of how our meetings go and the communications that we might have. So that's going to be the topic in September. And then in October, we're hopeful to have an RMA update, because by then we will have done the rules comments and sort of some of these initial sort of checkoff list items that have to be done. And it'll just be good to bring the GRAC up to speed on where we're at. We are driving toward a July 1, 2025 start, if that stays, you know, in place for kind of the first, you know, implementation date. So things are moving really quickly. And then in December, it's, if you remember the past 2 Decembers, we've had Group A, Group B, now we're in Group C for periodic reviews of, in this case, Walker Garbage and SWATCO this year in terms of their certificate and their compliance with everything from billing to various rules, et cetera. So we have something scheduled for every meeting once we reconvene in September. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Kathy. In terms of the RMA you mentioned, that's on the October 10th. Is that going to be a rules when you say recycling modernization update? Is that no?
It's more likely to be, where are we in the process? What have we done? What has been, you know, the outcome? What has DEQ done? What is the producer responsibility organization? Where are they at? You know, where are we in the process? And you know, I can tell you that when DEQ actually implements whatever the final rules look like, that will impact our rules, because they're just things that even just from a definitional standpoint may not align.
Mhm.
And then there's a lot of requirements that may lend themselves to being called out in our administrative rules.
Yeah.
But that's
So,
going to take a long time. I mean, that's like several month process to engage all the interested parties, as well as the service providers and things like that.
yeah. When we talked about, you know, discussing the extra fees as part of the RMA, when would we be able to do that?
Part of it is rate setting, and that really doesn't get going until like March.
Mhm.
So that's one aspect. And then the rulemaking will be going on most likely well into next year, but it needs to be most probably in place by July, at least part of it, just
Mhm.
because to align. So somewhere between now and then, I don't know, to be specific.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't miss, because I know it's hard with rate setting, right? That becomes a difficult ship to move once it gets going. So as long as we capture the concerns that folks have before that time frame, that'd be great. Christy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, very quick question. So there's no November meeting?
Sorry, you're right. My calendar skills aren't very good. There is likely to be a November meeting. I just didn't have a topic there yet, but I'm guessing there will be.
think Kathy knows she's going to be busy, so she's already preparing to be busy in November for the December timeframe. So yeah, I think if people have, I know, something they want, please let me or Kathy know. We can talk about it, so we can prepare well ahead of time to avoid slamming Kathy's calendar. Great, thanks for all of that, Kathy. Next item is oral communication. If anybody from the attendees pool would like to have a comment or question, you can use the raise a hand feature and Kathy and company can promote you.
I don't see any hands raised.
Looks like it. So we can move on to our presentation for Beyond the Bin. This is it. Heather and Jennifer be presenting. If you guys don't mind just introducing yourselves briefly before, for folks who do not know you.
Oh, sure. I will start. Heather Robinson, waste reduction specialist for Washington County.
And I'm Jennifer Stefanik. I'm the Green Business Coordinator on our business outreach team for Washington County. So we are going to share a presentation that's called Beyond the Bin. And Heather is going to share her screen. She's going to control the slides, so she'll be driving tonight. And so without further ado, I'll get right into it. So yeah, again, I'm Jennifer Stefanik with Solid Waste and Recycling, and just welcoming you, Grack, to an updated presentation of Beyond the Bin. Some of you, I think back in 2022, had seen this presentation, and so there might be some familiar content and graphics. But about midway through, we're going to share some new outreach resources that our team recently developed, which this group will be the first to see those resources. So some videos that we worked with a media company and some other outreach materials. So we'll have a little bit of a midway break and kind of discuss what we're seeing. So and then we've added a few new slides at the end. So there will again be some similar familiar content sprinkled throughout, but there will also be some new content that we've put in there. So, and like I mentioned, I'll be presenting here for the first half, and then Heather will take over. So next slide, please, Heather. So for this presentation, we'll briefly revisit recycling and composting in the context of downstream impacts, or this bin mindset, so recycling bin or whatever that type of bin. And we'll review a graphic that will ground us in the stages of a product's life cycle and all the phases that the product goes through to get to the consumer, such as production, distribution, and transportation, which are all considered these upstream impacts. And then we'll share more examples of how waste prevention or minimizing consumption are accessible options, and how reuse and repair are becoming much more available as an alternative to purchasing new items. So next slide, please. So what is a bin mindset? So this will be some of this familiar content for most of you from 2022. So this is this bin mindset is really how we currently manage things that we no longer want and don't want to put in the garbage. So it's usually at this point where we really start to think about the environmental impact of our stuff that we recycle, compost, or donate. So when we think beyond the bin, the idea is to really contemplate the impact of anything that is produced and consumed much earlier than we would generally start to contemplate that impact. And so often the environment is considered at that point when someone wants to dispose of something they no longer want. So, maybe they're asking questions like, should I recycle it? Should I compost it? Should I trash it? Should I donate it? What are my options other than landfill? So instead, through our systems currently, we want someone else to do something with these items. We want recyclers to take our packaging and make sure it's recycled. We want things to break down in the compost bin. We want to take electronics to a recycling center, so we feel good about replacing our old devices and getting new devices. And we want to take our used clothes, household goods, and shoes, among many other items, to a donation center, because we hope that someone will use it. And we really trust that these systems work as intended, and that our materials are getting recycled or reused. So, but by the time we're at that point of deciding what to do with our discards, most of the environmental damage has already been done. And so this is the upstream impact. And then we continue to create and discard more and more. And the bin systems that we rely on are being strained and overwhelmed, certainly. And that's the downstream part. So next slide, please. But, really, it's hard to hear that most of this negative impact on the planet or people has already been done by the point of disposal. So we've already gotten it, and we're making that decision to get rid of it. So let's just kind of walk through these stages as a bit of a refresher. So you can hit that first stage there, Heather. Thank you. So we've got production, materials, extraction, processing, and manufacturing of products here. You see in the green and the orange. And then also distribution, which includes international and domestic transport, which a lot of products that we purchase go through both of those modes of transportation. And then it goes on to a retail market where consumers purchase for home and business use. So that's that next phase. And then this last phase, which is the last stage in the purple, is the disposal phase, which is really the smallest in comparison to all the other stages preceding it. So the disposal method can matter up to a point, but not as much as people think when considering kind of this whole picture that we see here. And this slide is from a DEQ research done back in 2017, and so they had created some graphics around it. And so we refer to this fairly often when we're trying to really convey this message about upstream and downstream impacts. So next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So here in a little bit more detail are those stages. And again, in the context, though, of impact to climate change and global warming potential measured in carbon through a life cycle analysis. So we're talking about carbon impact here. And you can see that on this graph, we've got a plastic water bottle. We're talking about a pound of beef. We're talking about a computer and a pair of jeans. The disposal barely registers on this graphic. So if you can hit that next, there we go. So at the very bottom of all of these images you see here is the tiniest portion. So it's really the smallest amount of the emissions that through this life cycle analysis. And we're going to review more of these later in the slides when Heather takes over. So let's move to that next slide. Okay, so this is where we are going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about these graphics that we created recently, our education and outreach team. We developed this content with, like I mentioned, a local media company to help us illustrate upstream impacts by featuring an everyday food item, in this case, a tomato. A tomato is really a good example of a food item that can have an enormous impact, and it represents a material or category, and in this case, food, that is wasted to the tune of 40% in the US. So we've probably heard many times about the amount of food that gets wasted around this country. But this tomato could be anything like we saw on the previous slide. It could be a pair of jeans, a plastic water bottle, a hamburger, electronic device, any kind of consumable good. It's all got an upstream impact. So we're going to watch two videos. They're both about 1.5 minutes. One's in English and one's in Spanish. It's an identical video, but we have it in both languages. So we're going to start with the English. And what I'd like you to do is make some mental notes of these impact stages that we've been talking about while you watch the video. Make a note of what it takes to get the tomato from the field to the table to the store. Note maybe how many people and resources are involved, and we can have a discussion or questions if anybody would like to right after the Spanish video. So Heather, if you can start with the English.
Do you know how a tomato gets from the farm to your plate?
Hey, here's some fresh tomatoes.
Grab some tomatoes.
Okay.
Put the rest in the fridge.
Okay. Ew! Should I put it in the compost?
Yes, because we forgot.
When we toss out food, we not only waste the food itself, but also the resources and efforts used to produce it.
What can we do next time so we don't waste our tomatoes?
Remember to eat it, cook something different with the leftovers, freeze it, or buy less. For more information, visit eatsmartwasteless.com.
Great, thanks, Heather. Yeah, you can cue up the Spanish.
¿Sabe cómo llega un jitomate del campo a su mesa?
Hola, ya llegaron los jitomates frescos.
Tráete unos jitomates.
Ok.
Pon lo que sobró en el refrigerador.
Ok. ¡Guácala! ¿Lo pongo en la composta?
Sí, porque se nos olvidó.
Cuando tiramos comida, no solo desperdiciamos la comida, sino también los recursos y el esfuerzo que tomó para producirla.
¿Qué podemos hacer la próxima vez para no desperdiciar nuestros jitomates?
Recordar comerlos, cocinar un platillo nuevo con lo que sobró, congelarlos o comprar menos.
Para más información, visite eatsmartwasteless.com.
Great, thanks, Heather. So, what did you notice? Were there any other resource-intensive processes to consider that we didn't include in the video? You can see what we can do with the rotting tomato at the end by composting it, but what the real point of this video is looking at what's happening before the tomato gets to the compost bin. And we certainly also talked about alternative uses for food before it goes to waste. There was 4 other additional suggestions that you could do with food waste. But so this is again an example of how we are starting to develop some of our outreach materials that really starts to shift the focus from downstream to upstream, and to this idea of, even though we included composting as an option, we're really trying to get the imagery in there that talks about what's happening well beyond or well before you get the tomato or the item, the consumable good or product to your home or to your business or, to that point of consumption. So, and really one of the goals of our division's strategic plan is just to keep continuing to shift this conversation to upstream impacts and where we can really start to make those incremental changes that are really impactful. So, so this video and the infographic I'm going to share next are again our first efforts in creating outreach materials for a wide variety of audiences.
Do you know how
So this infographic was in the printed newsletter that went out in June. Many of you may have received this, so it might be familiar. And we're taking a bit of a different approach at raising awareness on the concept of upstream by really creating an accessible print version as well. And then we'll also be adding a new page to our website that uses some of these new materials, and we're going to continue to build on what we've created here. So we're really, open to feedback to what we've shared with you today. And if there's anybody that has any questions or wanted to just make any comments or have a discussion at this point, we're happy to do that. I'll be turning it over to Heather here in a moment, but yeah, if anybody'd like to jump in, feel free.
Oh, thanks. It was nice. Maybe we can pause here for some discussion.
Sure.
Let's see. Christy, you go ahead.
Well, I love this, first of all, it's great. And Beyond the Bin is such an important concept. I wondered about adding a little thing about eating seasonally as a way to reduce some of the international transportation and all that. We don't necessarily need to be eating what are probably fairly tasteless tomatoes in January anyway. That's the only additional thought I had to reduce a little bit, at least, of the upstream impact.
Sure, that's a great thought, great suggestion.
Yeah, I'll second that one.
I love what I saw.
Great, thank you.
So again, I think the video also is very well produced, excellent, informative. First quick question, can you actually freeze tomatoes? I didn't know that.
Apparently you can. I didn't know you could put a whole tomato in the freezer either. I think I've just never tried it because I've figured out other options.
I definitely will try it. I wasn't aware.
But does not come out as fresh as before you put it in the freezer.
Yeah.
Great for stew.
But the question that popped in my mind was, the prompt where you said, buying less type of thing. Totally get that. But isn't the nature of the amount that is produced, it still exists, right? Whether it's purchased by a consumer or not. So the video doesn't seem to talk about what happens if there's an overproduction and things are just not bought, right? Is that something that's not in the purview of this? I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are on that.
I mean, I think where really this is about at the consumer level and making that decision about how much food you'll purchase or how much of the product you'll purchase and take home and use it. And we'll stick with food because we know that it's such a perishable item. And so by buying the amount that that you and your family or your, whatever your housemates, how in that range of consumption. So I think, yeah, it's that idea of the overproduction is something a little bit beyond what our target community is, and that kind of behavior change, if you will, in terms of like making a list when you go to the store. That's why we reference Eat Smart, Waste Less at the end. We have a lot of tools that help folks really plan their meals, shop with that in mind, shop their kitchens first so they're not over purchasing. And because we know that there's a lot of food waste happening at home. And it's about food waste. It's about wasting all of those upstream resources that went into that. So it's a balance, right?
Yep. No, it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Peter had your hand up. Yeah. And I see Leslie too. I think Peter was up next, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I work at DEQ, and first of all, this is great. I love the concept of this. I like it because it's very simple for an introduction to your, to a basic consumer about this idea of life cycle thinking about things. And of course, you've used one kind of parameter around food and really looking at carbon impact. And that's kind of like, the topical thing. And it's certainly an important thing. So I like this. It's hard to compact all the other possible issues that are related to this about, buying local and international, stuff. And then there's, probably, 20 or 30 other parameters, environmental impacts that could be looked at. And that gets very complicated. So I think this is a good thing for folks to start thinking about. one of the things that we have done at DEQ is looked at this issue of local. And from a carbon standpoint, it isn't always a winner to buy things local, which is counterintuitive, with like a lot of stuff is with life cycle analyses. For instance, buying fresh apples from Peru in the winter is probably less on a carbon impact than buying apples in Washington State that have been refrigerated using high carbon electricity to keep them crisp. You know, those kinds of
yeah.
things where, you know, so it gets very complicated. It's not a truism one way or the other, and you have to really look at each individual item and how it's produced. And you get, you know, it's believe me, I drive myself nuts now knowing what I know about making choices. But I think from a basic consumer perspective, it's really important to understand that there are things beyond what you see at the store, and there are implications for you in terms of your waste. And this is maybe a separate topic, probably not direct to this campaign that you're doing, but I've noticed, you know, the last 2 or 3 years with high inflation, we've talked a lot about high food prices, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of link between that and reducing food waste and the amount of money that can be saved by doing that and the incentive of that. I mean, if you're worried about food prices and they are going up, you have some of that in your control. And I'm not putting that all on the shoulders of Washington County, but it's the kind of thing that I'm just really shocked at, that I don't see that as a primary driver of the messaging to consumers right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a little piece at the end. I think about there might have been just a tiny piece about saving money, but yeah, especially right now when food across the board is up quite a bit, and making that connection. And even if it wasn't, you know, it's still about saving money. And we find that in the commercial, you know, work that I do too. That's a leading message, because we're working closely with businesses just to get that food out of the landfill right now, to get it into compost. But how can we even talk about it? It's like what I say to a business sometimes is, you're paying for it to bring it into the business, you're paying your staff to create something with it, and then you're paying a third time to throw it away. And there could be even I mean, there's certainly more embedded cost in there that we don't even talk about, but try to really raise that question about cost for sure. Yeah, great. Great stuff to hear from you, Peter. It's great. I appreciate your perspective for sure. Leslie.
Yeah, hi. So this last conversation kind of got to what I was going to suggest. I think it's a very natural, like, you know, instinct to think about the personal cost, like financially, of throwing away food, but not so much in terms of the cost of resources, because I liked that all of those different, you know, costs were mentioned at the end along with the financial cost. But I think if there's a way to sort of explain further why the importance of wasting water or using water that you didn't need to use is still a cost, and whether that's just financial or climate or something like that, I just think it can be like punched up more, especially given like what we were talking about with Pete, the you know, the pinch we're all feeling right now buying food. Because just from my perspective, like my first instinct when I throw away food, I'm like, oh, like I spent money on that. Right. And so I'm trying to think of like the hierarchy of what a consumer is going to feel affected by. And now I feel I feel very called out by the compost thing, because I'm like, there's compost, so I don't feel as guilty because I'm putting it in the compost, and now I'm like, I'm still doing it. Like, so there's some mental gymnastics I think that maybe need to be addressed. I think this is an like awesome resource, and I think it's a really good kind of like roadmap. I hear you on like, there's so many different behaviors you're trying to change at once. And I think, okay, what would the consumer feel most affected by? Definitely like their wallet. And then like, if you think about it, wasting water means there's less water that we all use. There's a cost associated with that. Do you want your water prices to go up? Like, I'm just trying to think of a way to sort of say, you can actually save by being really responsible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for dealing
yeah.
with my rambling about finances and
Oh no, yeah.
personal
I mean,
choice.
it's top. It's a top concern for sure. And so yeah, it's definitely trying to simplify the message because it is such a dense topic, and so and trying to really make it accessible to so many different audiences. So,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah. Ashman.
So I wanted to ask, kind of just like your distribution strategy. I unfortunately missed this flyer in my mail. I know flyers are a great way to get it out to people, but do you guys like push it on the app as well, or go on social media? And also, or even like, I know we've gotten suggestions in the past of distribution through schools because kids can be a great influence to their families. So just kind of curious on the, you know, the target audience, and then also how you will get this out.
Heather, do you want to talk about, is there any GRD potential?
Yeah, so every time we make a video or do some sort of resource, we're looking at all of the avenues. So social media, the app, how do we get people to our YouTube page? Where do we post this on our actual website? Like Jen mentioned, I think we're looking at creating a new resource page about kind of more upstream thinking with prevention and reuse. We have repair already. So yeah, we haven't really talked much about this, but this was sort of the first foray after, you know, sending it out to 250,000 households or whatever, just to get some feedback on that video, really, to see if the message is landing. One of the things I was really curious is if the focus on the tomato really made people think tomato, 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 and not so much like the bigger picture. So I'm kind of glad to hear, you know, although this is a self-selected group, that some of those bigger picture elements made it through. But also we didn't want to like demonize the tomato. So like we had to use something that was very accessible and like, you know, was something that you could recognize, you know, everywhere. So
Down with salsa.
yeah.
Yeah, I would just add real quick too that we definitely will be kind of building a pretty robust communications plan around, you know, getting this out to all of our communities. So I'm sure that we'll be in the months to come. Like Heather said, we'll have it on our website. We're going to be loading those videos to our YouTube channel, and you know, this is just sort of the beginning. So, and I apologize, Ashvin, you did not get one in your mailbox.
I don't check the mail in my house, so it's very well.
Oh, okay. I'm sure we have.
I would love to. My
plenty
kids
left
came
over.
home from school with it. You know, that'd be great.
Oh
Or-
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. They
you're a fan
used
of
it.
the app, so
for-
you know.
Well, we
getting
have lots left over. If we have some that we can share for sure. But yeah, we'll keep you all posted through Kathy on where things are going to be posted and how the information will be disseminated to our communities.
Mhm.
So now I'm going to turn it over to Heather, unless there's any other questions or comments or discussion.
Oh, I thought I saw Pete's hand, or maybe it was just, nope. Okay, well, I will move on here. Alrighty, so yeah, that video we were talking about wasn't necessarily about tomatoes, but about consumption generally. And that tomato could have been a water bottle, a burger, a phone, jeans. So for the next section, we'll go over these 4 items, and that represent high impact categories of materials that are of particular concern. So these high impact categories, they have high impact on the environment and people, and also show up in notable quantities in our waste and recycling streams. And these next slides will look similar to, like Jen mentioned, the previous Beyond the Bin presentation with some updates. And at the risk of being a bit repetitive, we'll touch on the impacts briefly, but there really isn't a need to get into the details or kind of read the slides thoroughly, since we kind of covered that last time. But the take-home messages from these slides are, this whole presentation really is everything has some sort of negative impact in a life cycle sense. Most of that impact occurs in upstream phases, but also it isn't just about carbon or climate change, even though that tends to dominate conversations about environmental impact. But even a product that is fairly carbon benign can be a problem in other ways. There's different categories of impact categories in a life cycle analysis, and very often you almost just see the carbon metrics. So, and then when we rely on methods of disposal like recycling, composting, and donation, those activities can actually have unintended negative downstream consequences. But for the most part, I want to spend more time discussing the solutions. So when we get to those slides, I'll open it up. So feel free to share your ideas and thoughts, initiatives that you find interesting, or things that you're involved in already. And those are the bins. Alrighty, so we'll first start with the general category of packaging, represented here by the water bottle. So briefly, production and transportation of the product and the packaging depletes resources, damages ecosystems. Recycling is often framed as big part of the solution, but the recycling system is imperfect. Not only does it not come that close to offsetting the upstream impacts, but with our current recycling system, we end up finding packaging waste on land and in water and animals and other impacts as well. So before we default to the recycling bin for packaging, what can be done first? So first, reconsider purchasing things generally. We not only prevent the item from being manufactured, but also eliminate the packaging and the transportation, storage, and disposal needs. Reduce packaging for things that we do need by consolidating shipping orders or using grocery store bulk bins rather than individually prepackaged items. And here you can also practice reuse with containers you have at home. Generally, a good rule of thumb is that the most sustainable item is the one you already have. So use that reusable water bottle, coffee cup, and shopping bag. You can get creative with repurposing. I have a very small personal goal of never buying gift wrap. So instead, I use maps and newspapers and other interesting materials, and my family has come to identify all of my gifts. Commercial reuse initiatives are gaining traction. So Bold Reuse and Okapi are local businesses that help food service providers employ reusable serviceware for areas where single use is common, like coffee cups, cafes, takeout boxes, or food carts. And they both received Metro Grant support for this, so there is funding available for these types of projects. And Waste Free Advocates is a nonprofit involved in this work. And Christy will give us a little bit of an overview of them and their initiatives after this presentation. So I'm going to open it up for comments, thoughts, activities, actions that you use in your own life or other projects and initiatives that I could add to this list. Has anyone used Bold Reuse or Okapi, seen that in the wild? Jen?
Yeah, I used to be a subscriber to Bold Reuse, and then they actually took it out of the stores for just regular kind of household consumers. So they stopped the subscription, and they're really moving to a large scale model. And and then I have met with the folks from Okapi, and I think they've got a really great kind of business model that they're starting to grow. And I will say that our regionally, we are starting to focus on this in some of our commercial outreach, our work group. That's a regional group that we're going to be focusing on reuse in commercial spaces. So this is hopefully going to get a lot more traction, and we're looking at developing a campaign. And so this is with all the jurisdictions around the region. And so I'm very excited about the potential of this.
Anyone else? Okay, I will move on. All right, our second category is edible food, represented here by the burger. It is one of the most impactful product categories because it is perishable, it's consumable, and very necessary globally. So we need to continually produce it. And agriculture, very resource intensive land, water, chemicals, and labor. Agriculture contributes to habitat loss in the US, and imported food threatens biodiversity in other countries. And some workers in agricultural and food processing sectors experience low pay, unsafe working conditions, or exploitation. So the fact that 30 to 40% of edible food is ultimately wasted means that we're exchanging those negative outcomes in order to feed the trash and compost bins. And kind of similar to sort of the recycling story, composting doesn't recoup the upstream losses. So we're gonna call you out, Leslie. On top of that, downstream effects of composting might be complacency with wasted food, leading to higher food costs and the lost opportunities to help alleviate hunger. And that wishful thinking about composting had led to an uptick in compostable food serviceware, which was found to contain those forever chemicals, PFAS, you may have heard about, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which then ends up in the soil amendments from those composting facilities. And there is an update to that in that the FDA had announced back in February that those substances containing PFAS have been phased out and are no longer being sold in the US for food contact use as early as this year. I don't know much more about that, but I kind of came across that and it's like, oh, that's good to hear. Good update. So before we default to the food scraps bin, let's yield on that. What can be done beforehand? So Eat Smart Waste Less originated in Washington County about 10 years ago and has expanded throughout the region. We've recently updated the website with 15 videos, some printables, and more than 30 tips organized among the 4 steps: planning meals, shopping smart, proper storage, and then eating what you have. County staff and master recycler volunteers are out in the community sharing these tips for reducing wasted food at home. And the DEQ also is continuing its focus on food with the Bad Apple campaign. Green business leaders help businesses set up food scraps collection and in the process also connect them with food pantries. And then through the Food Waste Stops With Me campaign, businesses share their successes where they adjust purchasing menu design, prep, and customer service practices to prevent wasted food. There's a network of food pantries throughout the region. Central Cultural recently opened their Mercado pantry in Cornelius and provide culturally specific free food to families in need. And a few organizations, such as Urban Gleaners, actively collect edible food for redistribution. Food will continue to be a regional focus for a while, so you'll be hearing more and more about food waste prevention in the months and years to come. So I'm going to open it up briefly. Any comments, projects, activities? Have you yourself looked at the Eat Smart Waste Less website? Have you tried measuring your own food? Have you changed any of your habits to reduce food waste? Christy.
Yeah, this unfortunately doesn't directly answer your question, but I've asked, talked to people about the 40% before. How much of that is household waste?
So household waste, I know from our own like Washington County waste composition studies, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong on this. I wanted to go look that up real quick before this presentation, but I think it was like 25% or more households. I could be wrong on that. I don't know if you have this off the top of your head, but I think the percentage of the waste in the stream is mostly from residential in terms of just like the volume and the weight, but the percentage of the garbage that is food waste out of the residential sector, I believe, is about 25%.
Thanks.
I can come back and correct that if I'm incorrect on that.
I was curious if, I think the principle makes sense, but from an economic standpoint, buying in bulk is so much cheaper, right? Maybe not everybody has room to freeze part of their stuff, and sometimes it's cheaper to waste something and buy it in bulk versus, buying your smaller portions or going to the store very often if you don't have the storage space. Just kind of curious if there's like a strategy that, if you shop at Costco, but you don't necessarily want to eat it all right away, like what's a good you know, and maybe it's like meal prepping or something like that. But I've just found that if I have an extra deep freezer and an extra fridge to help me deal with all that extra food, which also may not be the smartest way to handle it. So I find a hard dichotomy to deal with the economics of it and the convenience while not wasting food.
Have you been to the Eat Smart Waste Less website by any chance?
I have seen it, yes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there's some tips in there about storage, about planning your meals and shopping. We do have this messaging that's more nuanced in terms of like, we tell people to go buy in bulk because of the packaging reduction, but that like you're saying, the flip side is you might end up actually wasting food. You buy a giant bag of spinach, let's say, and you don't get through half of it before it's gross. And so like, does the less packaging actually, is that less of a sin, quote, quote, than the food waste? And it's usually maxed out to where wasted food probably has a larger environmental input than the packaging that you save by buying in bulk. But to your point about financial things, that's, you know, that's a personal kind of like budgetary thing. But there are a lot of, I know personally, there's a lot of things that you could do to store things properly. I know I use the bulk bins a lot. So buying in bulk at the bulk bins is not necessarily me coming home with 5 pounds of rice. It's being able to get what I need for as long as I know I can use it without having something pre-portioned and pre-packaged. So I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts on that, on how to navigate that. Yeah, if you had an example, we might be able to create some tips around it for specific food stuffs and put that in our program. We do really like getting tips from the public and like incorporating that in some of our messaging.
Yeah. You know, I found myself going to the store less often and buying more at a time. And so, yeah, it's definitely a different problem, but I'll check out the website more and see, you know, it's just, does it make sense? Maybe it's not part of the discussion of like, you know, the carbon footprint of having an extra deep freezer to save you the trouble of, you know, wasting food. But maybe that still makes sense.
I don't know. That would be a life cycle analysis that
Looking into what Pete is talking
contract out for, I suppose.
Okay, no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something you'd probably have to do is like, how often are you actually throwing away food, and then calculate the price of what you're throwing away and think, well, if I just spent that same amount of money for buying less food because it's in smaller packages, you'd be spending the same, but you'd be wasting less food, if that makes sense. If you find you're throwing food out. So Pete, I think you were next.
Yeah, I'm listening and thinking about this. So you're right. There's no clear, good answer about, you know, what's the impact of putting stuff away in the freezer versus, you know, driving your car more often to the corner store. You know, there are studies out there, and you know, it's a lot of this obviously gets down to personal convenience or perceived convenience. Other goals, like some people like to have a stockpile of things in case kind of thing. You know, we have the big one. People like to have food and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of personal, you know, views on this. Or I can buy a lot right now because it's on sale or it's in season and that kind of thing. I can put it away and use it and enjoy it when it's not in season. So a lot of it's that kind of trade-off. You know, we've got a small refrigerator, so we shop frequently, about weekly, at our main supermarket of the week, whichever one we decide we're going to be near when we're out doing other things. And we do have a very small chest freezer that we put things in that we either grow at home or that we use or can find that we know we'll use and we find them on sale, or that with special dietary needs, they're difficult to find. And so we do find them, you want to have them because they're not often available at the store. So there's a lot of personal need and preference that goes into this thing, which makes it tough because, you know, never are we telling people that they're wrong in their choices. We're trying to help people understand there are impacts to the choices that they make, and some of the choices probably, if they want to, could change some of the impacts for themselves in terms of money and as well as the environment.
Thanks, Pete, for that. Leslie.
Yeah, well, for the record, I did just try to look up the website and I called it Eat More, Waste Less. So if we want to change that, you name the name of that. Yeah, the domain is available. So I love the tips that are on the site, and I find them to be extremely helpful. I almost feel like they're a little buried on the site. Like, I don't know it, and it might just be I'm not overly familiar with the site, but I just think they're like really great, and I just wonder if there's a way to spotlight that information. I had a really good thought, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna come back to me. Okay, yeah, so this in Portland, obviously this is gonna be seasonal, but any sort of like encouragement for like container gardens, or like, if you trim the ends of your scallions, you can grow your own green onions or things like that. I didn't see any of that on the site, but I think that could be very empowering. For the first time, I'm actually having like a garden that's producing things I want to eat. And I'm like sharing all my mixed greens with my neighbors and everything. So it's nice. And I think container gardens have become more popular in a way that like even somebody maybe with a balcony or a little patio can maximize that. And also a PSA that many Grange halls have free seed packets. So it's not even that there's a huge investment required. Just something to think about as we think about like seasonal eating and, like what Christy mentioned. I think it was Christy talking about eating what's available. So those were my many thoughts.
I do appreciate the feedback on the website. That's something that we don't have yet, is some really good community feedback and user feedback. So that is something we're looking to get more of, but I'm going to go ahead and lob that away.
Even if it's like a tip of the week or something where it's like a big like splash or something, like a big call out that you can see, where it's maybe more snackable versus like taking the entire challenge. Obviously you want people to take the challenge, but it doesn't hurt to just have that little like eat this first decal, or like make sure you put dates on your leftovers, or learn the difference between a Best Buy, Sell By. I think that's really valuable.
That's great. Thank you. So I see the time here, and I'm going to scooch on to the next topic, which is, all right, electronics. So suffice it to say, most of the damage done by electronics, which is our next category, represented here by the mobile phone, occurs upstream. That's because of the mining, the refining, the transportation, and manufacturing. And again, the easy option is often framed as recycling, but that does have the unintended consequences. A lot of the materials simply are not recoverable, and communities are burdened with the disposal. They're dealing with the human and ecotoxicity issues, not to mention those piles of wastes. And these are the kind of effects that maybe aren't easily seen if you're just looking at stats on carbon footprint. So, for electronics, what can we do before heading to a recycling center? Well, of course, we can reconsider it, of course. The first question is always, do I need it? More and more items are being designed with electronics parts. I recently just saw an egg tray that is app enabled to alert you when you run low on eggs. So my first question was, do we need that? We can buy used. FreeGeek, oh, here we go. FreeGeek has a store of refurbished equipment where you can buy used electronics. We've partnered with them on multiple projects on their drives so that they can repair, refurbish, and then redistribute those electronics through their community programs or through their store. Buying well often means looking for good quality, durable, so that the item will last, but you can even add repairability to your decision matrix. iFixit posts repairability scores on their site in addition to the hundreds of repair guides they have to offer. An often overlooked strategy is extending the life of what you have with general maintenance and repair. So often good care, cleaning, and some maintenance can keep electronics and other products in use longer. At our repair events, maintenance issues does come up frequently, specifically and particularly with fans, heaters, and vacuums. Repair Fair is a volunteer-driven community repair event where skilled volunteers help people fix their things. I've coordinated 59 events with a total of 2,400 items that have come through with about a 66% success rate. The county adopted the program in 2020, so 22 of those events were run as a county program. And that will continue on in the future, which is why I really am happy that Washington County adopted that. Now, these events aren't intended to actually take customers away from repair businesses. We encourage people to become familiar with the repair businesses in their area, and Repair Finder is a nice mapping tool that helps with that. Lastly, a right to repair bill passed in Oregon this year. So Oregon joined New York, Minnesota, and California to try and make repair easier through legislation. Oregon's law requires manufacturers of consumer electronics and household appliances to provide repair tools and info needed to diagnose, maintain, and fix their products. And this is the first in the US that also prevents parts pairing, which is where a company uses software to identify component parts, often making it difficult or impossible to use compatible parts that aren't actually from the manufacturer. So I will pause here if anyone's got something to add, or I move on there. Oh, Sandra.
Shoot, I gotta get my mute there. The repair fairs, I've been trying to get in one for a couple of years now. They just aren't that many. There was one, I believe, in Hillsborough. The next two, one's in Sherwood and one's in Cornelius. I mean, I'm not going to drive all the way out there, but I don't know who sponsors those, but it'd be nice to have a lot more of those. And they're very popular and they fill up very quickly. So
They are, and it takes a fair amount of staff time to coordinate them. So we have them about once a month at different libraries that invite us in. Yeah.
And the thing with Free Geek is, if I remember correctly, they're only located on the east side. So that's a long distance to go there. There is a company similar to them. I think they're off of Cornelius Pass on the way to north of 26.
Yeah, Computer Drive Connection.
What is it called? That place, I've been in there once. It's just like a melee of everything in there. It's crazy. I've never been there because it's way over on the east side, and I want to go there. But you also, well, actually not.
I was just saying Surplus Gizmos might be the thing you're talking about on Cornelius Pass.
I think
they're not actually similar to Free Geek, but they will take a lot of gadgets and electronics, as a drop-off spot, and then they resell. But Free Geek has a bunch of like community programs for like bridging the digital divide and educating people on how to use computers and stuff like that. So they're similar from hey, I need to take this random weird electronic thingamajig somewhere to get reused, but
Habitat for Humanity does a lot of recycling, takes in a lot of stuff too. I don't know if you want to mention them, especially.
I will in a future slide.
Getting ahead of myself. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I had some response to something you had asked, and I just forgot about it, but I'll remember. But I will. Maybe catch you when I do get something in Hillsborough for repair there, and I'll make sure that I let you know. All right, so our fourth category is textiles, represented here by jeans. Every piece of clothing, like everything, has embodied resources in it. And the processing is particularly damaging to water systems because of the dyes and the chemicals used to treat the fabric. Donation to a large reuse organization can feel like the right way to go, but some of those unintended downstream effects include, again, the shifting of the disposal burden of tons of unsellable clothing to other countries. And these clothes end up burning in landfills or piled in riverbanks. So before relying on donation, recycling, or trash to deal with unwanted textiles, we can reconsider. So there's Project 333 and other sort of minimalism type projects and campaigns, and that in the best cases, they focus on making the most of what you have and helping people realize they don't quite need as many things as they think they might. And hopefully the outcome is that fewer items are actually brought into the home rather than just thinking of it as decluttering to make way for more new stuff. So there's plenty of places to borrow clothing, particularly for special events and occasional events. The DEQ's Every Thread Counts campaign provides tips to extend the life of clothing through maintenance and repair. In fact, clothing is one of our most common items we see come through the repair fair. We share repair tips and tutorials through Facebook and newsletters, and are planning our first repair fair Fix-It workshop. The workshop will be in Aloha next week and focus on these skills needed to repair denim jeans. Now, if you aren't a DIYer, finding a local clothing repair business can be really handy. Dry cleaners often have mending services as well. And we can buy used and support local reuse businesses, or keep an eye out for clothing at community swaps or online platforms. I'm going to move on to this slide because of time. But for everything else, we can also reconsider it if we need it. We can borrow. So the Washington County Libraries not only lend books, but the Library of Things lends small appliances, toys, games, and other equipment. The Forest Grove Senior Center offers a lending program for medical equipment, and they accept donations. We can find things used. So retail outlets like the Habitat for Humanity's Restore are great for used furniture, fixtures, and building supplies. Online resources like FreeCycle and Buying Nothing groups have changed the landscape of sharing and the used goods economy. It also has alleviated the burden on donation centers somewhat. This is a good option because, you know, people coming to pick up your items really actually want them. The County and Westside Planet Alliance have coordinated 8 PlanetCon events that attract hundreds of attendees each time. And usually they are attracted to the recycling activities, but at every event we incorporate upstream activities like the Really Free Tables community swap area, a repair fair, donations to organizations like Washco Bikes, Project Homeless Connect, Family Promise, and the Lions Club. And lastly, through the Recycle Plus special collections, we've been testing out collecting items for reuse and donation. So in partnership with Community Warehouse, we've had 5 special collections for pots and pans and other kitchen items, blankets, sheets, and towels that Community Warehouse can distribute to their clients. And right now I'm exploring a special collection for school supplies. So at this point, I like to bring back this revised hierarchy from 2022. So starting at the top, we figure out how to avoid the production of new materials using prevention. Once something exists, let's get the most out of it by keeping it functional. Then when it's outlived its usefulness, as is, we ask which bin does it go in? What is its highest and best use? Where is the demand? Is it an appropriate feedstock? What are the unintended consequences? Or is it just better to store it in a landfill for now? Ultimately, as part of the solid waste system, we have a responsibility to see that materials are managed well with proper disposal as the option when no better option exists. And we are fortunate to live in a place with agencies looking out for our air, water, and land. This isn't the reality in many parts of the world, and unfortunately, that is where some of our wastes are heading. So, oops, last slide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christy to dive a little deeper into the Waste-Free Advocates work. And then if there's any time remaining, we can have more discussion or questions and comments. So I will stop sharing.
Heather, who did you say was taking over?
Oh, I think Christy, but I don't see her on. Oh, there she is. Oh, Christy, you said you had you wanted to walk through the Waste Advocates website.
Am I sharing? Did I make it work?
Looks good.
Sound good. Okay, great. So I started out, Ashvin asked me to look into reduce and reuse because I had spoken out before about how important that is before we think about recycling. So I started to do some reading and such, and many of the things that are addressed at this website are also part of the presentation you just saw, which is great. what I like about this and the presentation you just saw is we have to have hope. We can't feel hopeless or else we'll never make the changes that we need to make. So giving people the specific things they need to do, it helps us feel better actually about our lives and about the future. So Waste Free Advocates, I just wanted to point out briefly, this website has some of the things that you already saw, but it also has an insane amount of resources here. Now, their current projects, Community Conscious Coffee Fest, and Retail Reuse, but they also have a pretty remarkable history that probably some of you have been part of. Oops, I hit the wrong one. There we go. Founded all the way back in 1987, started out as Recycling Advocates. And I like that there is a focus on not only promoting the individual to make changes, but also lobbying, focusing on what's going on in the larger picture of the bigger movement. And this lovely little timeline points out not only what they did, but also, you know, what laws have been passed and how things have changed over time. And I didn't realize this went all the way back to 1987. And some of you probably already have been part of that. If you go to the home page, eventually you get down to an incredible number of specific organizations and programs and pieces of information that you can access. And then hovering, you get a little bit more about them. You can click on them and get even more. If you become a member of Waste Free Advocates, you can get discounts every month at different stores. So it encourages you to become aware of the stores that are available, like Okapi, which was mentioned earlier. And when you hit load more, okay, I love tennis ball recycling event. That was great. What a great idea. And then this banana guy who goes around to various events and asks people the kinds of questions that the county asks at their tables too. And so it's very fun and entertaining. Load more. How to fix your stale crackers. And I love the deconstruction and salvage shop. If you're a builder, it's just got all kinds of great opportunities there. Tabling, of course, and more. Food waste trivia. There's a really powerful video here about glass recycling being a really pretty terrible idea and how much resource it takes to recycle glass. And I didn't attend this event, but there is this Ravino that's trying to come up with refillable wine bottles and make that economic and make it sustainable, which just makes so much sense. Food waste, more. I've been to Mama and Papa's Zero Waste Shop. Again, the monthly discount for members who join this organization. Load more. Way of being. Low waste business partners. And it just keeps going on and on. So if you're interested in opportunities, in just learning about things that are going on, I'm hoping that what we're seeing is a change in consciousness, like we saw eventually after many years. We saw a change of consciousness about smoking or about drunk driving. That's where we need to be, is get people thinking entirely differently. Signing up for the newsletter and their partners. And they have additional resources here, free resources to download, food waste reduction businesses, non-governmental government, etc. Social media inspiration, ways to donate. So anyway, I just found it a very exciting website. I've spent a lot of time here and learned a lot and tried to start, you know, patronizing some of the businesses that they promote. So I was encouraged in seeing all that's going on, and I'm so glad the county is dedicating, I should say, staff time to reduction as well. I started my research looking at a quote from the World Wildlife Fund saying it takes 1.5 years to generate the resources humans use in 1 year. So it truly is not sustainable, as we know, and we can't recycle our way out of it. So my final thought is just, I wonder if we need to change the name of the GRAC to include reduce and reuse somehow, although the title would become somewhat unwieldy. But I think it's important for the county to be really focused on that as well as promoting recycling. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you for sharing, Christy. We'll have to all check it out and see. But it is cool. I think the businesses is really neat to see all the people who are committed, among other things. So yeah, thank you. Well, it is getting late, so we can move on. Thank you, presenters Heather and Jennifer as well for all of that information. I'm sure folks can reach out to you directly if they have more comments. But thank you, all the work you put into that, sharing with us. Last item on the agenda is oral communication, another opportunity for folks in the public attendees pool. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the raise a hand feature. And it doesn't look like it. So thank you all for attending today. It's a good informative meeting and we had lots of participation. So thank you everybody for coming in. Have a good evening. See you in September.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
This completes the July 11th, 2024 GRAC meeting. I'm going to stop recording.
Bye, everyone.